listening to The Home Recording Show, hosted by Ryan Canestro and John Tidy. Find us online at homerecordingshow.com.
Welcome back. With us today, John Tidy at epicsounds.ca, reaperblog.net, and audiogeekzine.com.
Hey, dude.
And I am Ryan Canestro. You can find John on Twitter at The Audio Geek. The emails are John or Ryan at homerecordingshow.com. If you're shopping on Amazon, click through our link. They'll break off a piece and send it our way. Click on the tip jar if you like shows at least once a year or two. The archives tab's near the top of the page. Check out every show we've done. You can find John on Facebook at facebook.com/homerecordingshow. If you listen on iTunes, please write us a review while you're there. Today we're going to talk about post-audio. So that's going to be exciting.
Well, it's something that I've kind of accidentally got into, maybe.
Me
I can't
too.
remember if you sent me the first film that I ever worked on. I think maybe you did.
Let me apologize in advance.
You learn so much so quickly, and not just about undercharging, but
That's the first big lesson you learn, because you think you can do it a lot faster. It's so time consuming.
It's very time consuming, and even if you're rushing, even if you're ignoring obvious things, it's still going to take
even
a
if you're
long
awesome
time.
at it.
So always charge double what your first instinct is, because it's always going to take longer.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're kind of joking about that. But what we're going to talk about today is kind of this hypothetical situation where you're a home studio guy or a small studio. You mostly work on music, but you've got this opportunity to mix a short film or feature-length film, something in your home studio. How do we get over that hump of the learning curve? Let's try to condense that down into an hour-long podcast.
And it's going to come up where someone creative type, someone shot something. Hey, I did this film, I did this thing, whatever it is. You're an audio guy. Just do the audio, because people just, will assume, oh, everyone can do audio that can do audio. Obviously, wildly different disciplines, but a lot of the same tools apply. It's just kind of different in a lot of ways. So I guess we're going to get into some of that and how not to hurt yourself.
Yeah.
When you request what you need from the filmmaker, make sure that they send you, along with the audio, a video with the time code burned into that video. And then that you line that up in your timeline so that matches your timeline on top. So you can always say, when you get your notes, I need to go to 1 hour, 21 minutes, and even to the frame. That's where this edit needs to happen. Your notes from the people that are sending them should always have the time code referenced. If you have to go through and scrub the whole movie to find, oh, remember that part where that guy and then the bird came in? No, give me the exact time code.
So important. So when you're approached for one of these jobs, they'll want to send you files, and you need it a certain way for it to actually make sense when you get into your DAW.
Well, they're going to want to send an OMF.
Yeah, and if they're working in Final Cut or Premiere, they can send an XML file, and that's even better.
Yeah. Because let's just stop right there. OMF is pretty much, you need Pro Tools to open it, or specialty software, which is never going to work properly with your other DAWs. It just doesn't. It hasn't. It's messy.
But even OMF from different versions of Pro Tools could
wildly flawed.
Yeah, it's not a great system. The XML system that Final Cut came up with, or it's a more transferable version of the same sort of thing. It's a document that says what files are used where in the timeline, how long they are, what their automation is, and all these kinds of things. And you can use tools like Vordio, Vordio, and convert it into a Reaper project. That's what I like to use. There's also AA Translator, and I've heard that works very well for converting an OMF to other formats, or like Pro Tools sessions into whatever.
So basically what that does is takes the timeline in their video session and lets you import it into your session so you can work on it in the software that you know.
Yeah.
Because video programs are not designed to do audio. You can do basic stuff, but you're going to be limited pretty quick.
Yeah, I've tried, And it's always faster to export your audio, drop it into a DAW like Reaper, do all your processing, print a stem, and bring it back into your video edit. That's a lot easier.
Now, for me, the number one benefit of getting one of those file formats in is that you have it exactly as it was on their machine. And where they made their edits, you're still able to pull the files from left to right so you can reveal some of that audio where maybe they made a cut because of a video choice, but they stepped on a word. So you can grab that, slide it back over, and still have what's underneath. If everything that they have there is just printed to WAV files, you might have missing chunks of pieces that you need.
Yeah, that's a pain. A lot of video guys don't really know how to do J and L cuts, and that's where the audio comes before the visual cut or after, and it kind of just looks like a J and an L in the actual timeline. I mean, it's a pain to do it in the video editors, but it's so important to get that right. The other way that they'll deliver files is consolidated tracks. So whatever's on audio track 1 will get printed, and they'll send that to you.
All with a common start point.
Yeah, they'll have a common start point. But what you run into is that every camera cut, often the dialogue will be in a different track. So you got to do this checkerboarding sort of thing where you figure out which mic was used, whether it's the lavalier mic or the boom mic, or maybe it's someone else's lavalier mic. You got to figure out what's the best one and then promote it to your dialogue track.
Yeah, well, trying to get organized is a whole different animal.
Yeah, yeah.
Because once you have that whole mess imported, there's stuff everywhere.
Yeah.
It's never like, hey, this one is where character 1's audio is on this track and character 2 audio is on this track. That does not ever happen.
And it's not even really the editor's fault. Video editing programs don't give a shit about audio. They'll just, you'll have stuff everywhere. And often they're just listening to they'll mute most of the tracks and they'll just have like a reference audio track.
Yeah, they'll probably just take on the day the sound mixer will make his mix, and that's what's also sent to cameras. So the camera audio will have that, and that'll just be a reference mix, and that's usually plenty good for editing, video editing. So they'll take that, and then all of those isolated tracks that are recorded underneath that, which are the isolated lavaliers, the isolated boom, and anything else that's happening on set, those will pretty much be ignored until the point where they have to re-import all that data to be able to export it to you. So that stuff could be all over the place. And, maybe when they're shooting one direction, the sound mixer only has one boom and one lav enabled. But then when they turn around the other direction where there's 3 characters, then they're going to enable all of those. So the order that they all fell in, they'll be in a different order now because the additional microphones have been turned on and now there's more tracks than there were before.
That was actually something that I didn't even realize till like a week ago, like why the tracks would change.
Mm-hmm.
And I would notice that it was happening at every cut, but I wasn't really thinking about, well, it's a wide shot, you can't have the boom there. Versus when it's a tight shot, you can have the boom really close. So that's why the tone changes and that's why the amount of mics changes.
I would leave the boom on, but yeah, when you're doing different back and forth, if there's only one character there, sometimes that actor will be acting with a stand-in. So the real actor is not even on the other side. So then there's no mic to turn on. But then when they turn around, then that actor's now there, and they could be stand-ins, and there could be all kinds of situations where those mics will just be turned off, track missing, and then in that polyphonic wave, you have different things in different orders. So that's another reason why things will easily get mixed up because of just the fast-paced nature of on set, and your sound mixer on set is worried about capturing that audio on the day and not, hey, how would this be much easier for post, even though I've never met the guy or talked to him?
Yeah. So what you'll usually be delivered is the dialogue tracks that were recorded on set, any ADR, which is automated dialogue replacement, or wild recorded tracks, which is just
audio recorded while the camera's not rolling.
Yeah, just stuff to fix and to fill in, and it's usually just dialogue. And then you'll usually have a music tracks that the composer has sent in based on their either rough or final edit of the actual video. The actual dialogue and the filling out of all of the sounds is usually like one of the last steps in the process.
Yeah. So by the time you get it, unless you're also doing Foley and special sound effects and special effects and all that, you should have several different layers of audio. So you have your onset sound, you'll have your ADR, which was done in a booth later if words need to be replaced, or maybe they were shooting at a location that looked beautiful, but there was a construction site behind it. They have to go in the studio and replace all of those words, match the lips. That's the ADR. Then you'll have Foley, which is people go back in and record footsteps, anything that's like paper being touched or whatever that you're seeing. And then you'll also have sound effects. And then you'll have a score. And then you'll also have additional music. So there could be a good amount of tracks, but you kind of want to organize them into those categories and break them off. And usually the first thing you want to dive into is the dialogue editing.
The films that I've worked on have only been music and dialogue. I haven't been delivered any backgrounds, ambience type fill-in stuff, no room tone to fill in gaps in the words.
Yep. On lower budget, you're going to have to do it all. You basically become all 5 different layers of that external sound post. Usually there's multiple groups of people that do each of those things. The smaller the budget, the more hats you wear.
If you're into it, it's such a cool learning experience because you learn what works with mic position or mic selection for Foley. You figure out things don't have to look the same as the picture to sound right. And when I'm working in Reaper, I'm always coming up with new custom actions and workflows that speed up the process after I've done it 20 times in a row. Like that checkerboarding thing I mentioned. I set up a toolbar that will take the selected item, split it, give it a color, and then promote it to a specifically named track. So dialogue 1, select it with the mouse, press the button, jumps up to dialogue track 1.
That's clever.
Yeah.
And there will be a tremendous amount of repeated actions in this kind of work because you're not taking a 5-minute song, you're taking an hour and a half of an entire movie. And you have to take all of those individual pieces and make them fit together. And you don't really realize when you're watching a movie, if you haven't done this kind of work before, how much goes into it and how many little things you have to do to make something feel natural when it might be the exact opposite of something you do in music, but it just has to feel real and believable and not take you out of the moment. Whereas in music, we want to take something and make it even feel artificial and weird and spaced out and stretched across the sound spectrum. It's kind of, you kind of have to undo making something sound special and make it sound pedestrian to make it fit.
Yeah. It's got to look right. So another thing that we need to do once we get our audio in, we've listened to some of it, so it's not horrible. We know what we're getting into. Probably want to mark each scene with a marker. And hopefully you've done some sort of spotting session. And spotting session is where you get a list of what sounds need to go where if they haven't been recorded yet, or maybe it's just notes on where the problem areas are, what the most important areas are, things like that. And those are also time-coded. So just, if you don't have that, and none of the films I've worked on have had that.
Oh, that's adorable. You think they would come like that.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to have markers. Having markers lets you make time selections a lot quicker, and then that helps you make automation a lot easier because you know that this scene is in a hallway. We can apply our hallway reverb. It just visually, it's a lot easier than just like 1 2-hour timeline with no markers and just audio bits and stuff everywhere.
And I drop in my markers as I'm doing my dialogue edit, which has to happen first anyway. Instead of just sitting and watching the movie and making notes, I jump straight into dialogue editing and then drop my markers in as I see something I have to come back to later. Oh, this is going to be a problem. This is where this needs to go. This needs to happen here. So I make my notes as I'm doing my dialogue edit, which kind of helps speed the process along. Because you're going to watch this movie many, many, many times. The less you can watch the movie and still be efficient getting through it, you should definitely think about that.
I actually do different colored markers for different things.
Oh,
so
fancy.
I'll use the default color for scene transitions, and I will use red for maybe like missing audio or major problems that I need to come back to. and I'll use yellow if it's missing or something like that. And Reaper actually makes it easy because you can set it up so that marker colors can go from the marker name. So if I put an exclamation point, it goes red. If I do a pound symbol, it'll do a yellow.
That's handy.
Super handy.
I would think that you would assign the different marker colors to a different key. So like just say on your number key, you can hit 1 for a red marker, 2 for yellow marker, 3 for a fuchsia marker.
You could probably set that up too.
I'm not one to mess with your system, bro. Calm down.
But often you're making a note about what it is anyways, so you're already typing.
Yep.
I think we're getting a little bit into the actual processing and workflow a bit too much or too ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about the actual equipment that you need. Every home studio is already going to have an audio interface and a decent computer for working with audio. You're going to have your DAW, but you're going to need some other specialized tools. You might want to get Vordio because it does that conversion for you, especially if you're working with Reaper, but it does some other cool stuff like being able to remove audio from a video file, replace audio in a video file, and some other things that I'm forgetting. You're going to need your speakers and headphones, monitor controllers so you can get a consistent monitoring level. You're probably going to want some sort of SPL meter. Even the one on your phone is going to give you a good reference or a decent repeatable reference. Might not be precise, but you use that when you're mixing?
No, not really. I have a level I normally set. I use the same speakers all the time. I always mix at a very consistent level. So I kind of know where that's at. I've never prided myself on being like a mastering guy. I try to be as consistent as possible, but I know there's people that can do that portion much better than me. That's why in my work, I've always liked tracking the most, and I've pretty much transferred my whole career into tracking, capturing on-set audio and tracking music. I still do a little bit of mixing, and I do a little bit of post, but the bulk of my work now is tracking because I know that's what I'm best at. But if it came down to mastering a real project, I'd be happy to mix it, but I would send it off to someone to master it because those fine-tuning level details are not my strong suit.
I bring this up because one of the problems I ran into the first film I worked on was that I didn't realize I needed to really like crank up my speakers in order to keep the mix dynamic. Because if you're listening to it kind of moderate levels, music mixing levels, you're going to over compress everything, and you're not going to meet kind of the loudness standards that films require.
Well, and there's so much more dynamics in film work than you would ever have in music and it depends on what the director wants. Sometimes the music is just overpowering, and I'm not a big fan of that style where the dialogue is faint and then the music just beats you over the face.
Yeah.
But there is so much more dynamic stuff that happens because if someone yells, you want it to get louder, not just compress it and stay within that tight window. So there's a lot more dynamic range you have to work within than in music. So that's another thing, kind of the headspace you have to get around coming from a music background.
I bring it up because it's something you kind of have to start your mix with. You need to kind of compress your vocals a little bit, or your dialogue track a little bit, so that
see what you did there?
Yeah, I was always doing that. Get the dialogue track fairly compressed so you can tell where it's inconsistent, where it's too low, and reference on a LUFS meter usually.
Well, I always start with dialogue editing, and by the time I work my way through the whole project, I don't really try to do any mixing at that point. I just try to do the basic dialogue editing because when I get through the project, I tend to go louder and louder from the beginning of the project to the end of the project with my dialogue. So whenever I get to the end, I always have to go right back to the beginning and make it consistent. And I'll always go back and forth and check, okay, here's 3/4. What's it sound like? And then go back to the first quarter. What's that sound like? And then I have to almost always bring up that beginning because where I start out, I don't end up.
Yeah.
And then once you get to the end, you kind of have a feel for the overall picture that you didn't have any perspective of in the beginning. So you kind of see where it goes. And then once you get to that end, you can say, okay, so here's how it should start. So I kind of try to keep in mind what I'm doing while I'm doing the dialogue edit for when I go back to do the mixing. And when I do my mixing on the dialogue, I do all my automation first before I add compression.
I tend to get a fairly solid processing chain done in advance, kind of. I might spend half an hour just listening to a couple of the dialogue lines, and I'll figure out how much noise reduction I need, how much compression I need, how many stages of compression I need, what sort of overall EQ can I apply to this that will work with all the dialogue tracks, some multiband compression, maybe some limiting, and I'll just take like an average line, and I'll actually check in my loudness meters to make sure that that's at minus 14 or something like that.
Well, there's also the challenge of taking multiple sources and making it sound like it came from the same place.
Yeah, matching is a huge part of what we have to do with mixing.
And in low budget worlds, sometimes there'll be multiple sound mixers on the same project, because as soon as they get a better job, that $150 a day you're paying them, they're gone. They're not hanging out. So you'll sometimes have one guy that has some good equipment, and then the next day a guy shows up with an H4n and a couple lavaliers he found from the storage bin that are all, 15, 20 years old. And then the next day you might have a guy show up with top of the line gear. So you'll have the same characters on different days with different sounds, and you've got to massage all that too. And I know RX put out some pretty amazing plugins a while back where you can take one sound, run it through, and then it'll make the other sounds match that. Do you remember which one that was?
I think RX has some sort of matching EQ now. I'm a couple of versions behind on it. I'm still on RX 4.
There's a room tone match, which is kind of cool. That's
I haven't
in
used that
RX 5. And then matching ADR to production dialogue. That's the EQ match. So I think that's the one that does it. The EQ match in RX 6 lets you match a profile of one chunk of audio to the next. And you can do some pretty amazing stuff. Yeah. But you basically have to take ADR and then dialogue recorded on different sources in different environments and make them all match across one consistent project.
Yeah, I'd say EQ is your main go-to tool for most of this stuff. I was using EQ Absolutely. On the dialogue bus, on the individual dialogue tracks, and then individual items in the timeline. So yeah, lots of EQ on the last film I worked on.
Absolutely. And you have to, and it's hard when you get into having to EQ each clip slightly differently. And then sometimes they'll be like, okay, well, these 8 chunks are identical, so I'll use the same EQ there. This one is totally different, so I have to do something different here. It gets frustrating because there's so many little details, and you have to be insanely detail oriented to be able to pull this stuff off.
Yeah. It's a combination of working quickly and efficiently, and also being like insane attention to detail. But usually after you do your first mix, it gets reviewed by several people, and you go through revisions and you can refine the process. But I don't know, not always, not on the last one I worked on.
Yeah, you just turned it in and heard nothing,
no
right?
feedback.
Well, that's my favorite, because no news is good news.
All right, so there's this idea of complete coverage, meaning that every scene has room tone, ambience, there's your dialogue, there's all the Foley, which would be footsteps, there's hard effects, which is like anything you see on screen, like if someone sits in a chair, you see them sitting in the chair, like you hear the chair move, and then they sit down, and there's the thump from that, and they're touching stuff on a plate, all those things, everything you see would have
stuff you never thought to think of.
Yeah. You need something there, and you could spend all day on getting the perfect thing that plays for 3 milliseconds in the scene. It's really easy to worry about the details that no one's going to think about. And of course, great films have all that attention to detail, but great films could also really just focus on making the dialogue awesome.
Great films also have massive budgets where there's a team of people that their job is to worry about the chair.
Yeah. So if you're doing it all yourself, you probably can't achieve complete coverage. You can't have 10 layers of ambience. You can't have next door there's this whole other story. going on.
A B story that's all just audio.
Yeah, just background. There's neighbors being chased by bees, or no, there's this weird thing that you want the dialogue totally crisp and clean, no background noise, and then you add in all these layers of noise to make it sound like a real world. Kind of bizarre, but it's something you have to do.
Well, and those background layers being continuous also hide the fact that there are edits and this isn't a linear real-time event happening. So if there is like a song playing in the background, or there is a guy mowing the lawn in the background, and that mowing the lawn sound never breaks, it's continuous through all the different camera angles, it joins together all of those elements. And you mentioned there, for a quick segue into some nonsense, I took a job where I did the on-set sound, but then he asked me to do the post sound. And I didn't realize, having gone through the whole shooting process, that when we got to the sound post, that he envisioned the sound to be an additional character in the movie. So that post session was absolutely insane. I've never done more layers, more just insane work on a movie in my life. I had to make an entire additional character in the movie that wasn't written or mentioned in any way in the script, and even noticed while we were shooting it. But in the end, the soundscape changed that entire movie from my first viewing to the end. It became its own thing. So watch out for that too when you're taking these jobs. Make sure you understand what they want before you agree to it and accept payment, because again, that's one of those things where I probably put in 10 times the amount of hours that the deal was for.
Yeah. But if you come up with something cool, I think it's often worth it to continue on with it.
I never thought I'd be able to pull it off, and I did. And even the DP that shot it, he was like, I don't know how you pulled that off. That's night and day. That's not the same movie we shot. And it was just the soundscape that did it.
Cool. So speaking of soundscape, how do we fill that in?
Magic?
Exactly. A bit of magic, a bit of luck, recording stuff yourself, and library sound effects.
Yep. And you can go nuts on either one, or use a little bit from column A and a little bit from column B. Like the thing about the chair you were talking about earlier, you can go through your library and find every little creak of wood and string those together and spend 17 hours on that. Or you could put up one microphone in the room and go sit on a chair.
Yeah.
And in many cases, putting up that one microphone sitting on a chair is more than enough to sell that audio if it was missing. And the sound guy, for some reason on set that day, didn't think it was valuable to just point a mic and hit record for 5 seconds.
In all the films I've worked on, I've done Foley and backgrounds myself.
Yeah, I try to pull a lot of stuff from library, but I have done a lot of recording myself. And sometimes you'll go through your libraries and you don't have something. I've had one where there were a bunch of gun sounds and everyone's got gun shots, but I needed gun handling noises, hitting things with a gun, loading, clips being pulled out, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I went and recorded a ton of that. Had one where I had to have dirt being shoveled on top of a guy inside of a casket. Not a whole lot of libraries are that wildly specific. So I went outside and dug up some dirt and shoveled it onto a piece of plywood. And that sounded just like what we needed. Sometimes you have to do that. I had one where a guy got his finger chopped off and then the lady took and dropped it in the toilet. Well, I didn't have that either. So while I was working on it, my wife brought out some dinner and there were some carrots. And I walked over the toilet and I put up a mic and I dropped some carrots in the toilet and recorded that. And it was perfect for the movie. So, you can get kind of creative with some of that. And instead of trying to go through sample libraries or start looking online for hours, just walk over and drop a carrot in the toilet.
Yeah.
I just recorded it right into the timeline.
Well, I haven't done anything that fun. This last film, there was two guys, they clinked some bottles together like cheers. And it sounded awful in the production tracks. It's just a clip. It is just awful. So I take a couple oil bottles, like glass bottles that I had in my kitchen, set up a shotgun mic, clink them together for 30 seconds. And of course the kids interrupt me
Naturally.
Like I hit record, I say, "Be quiet, guys," and they start fighting like immediately.
Daddy
So
said start yelling.
That's something that I have from my library. I have 5 or 6 different bottle clinks. I did a documentary. A lot of the dialogue was either like close mic'd or it's shotgun mic. Cleaning it up, and then it's just kind of lifeless. It doesn't appear to be coming from that person in that environment that you're seeing. 90% of the footage was like someone talking to the camera, not voiceover. Voiceover, it's okay if you don't have an ambience around it. But
And
if
that
you're
should
seeing
sound like it's separated.
Yeah, if you're seeing someone sitting on the steps in front of a house, you know that they're in a city, things like that. You have to put in that environment around it. So I actually got my Zoom H. I think I was using the H4n at that time. Built-in mics. Went out beside my house. I got a busy street beside me. The one time I've ever been thankful for that busy street. I don't know how many podcasts
It's
this
ruined.
street has interrupted, and
I've heard a couple motorcycles already today.
there's so much noise from that. But it ended up being perfect. So I had like cleaned up dialogue in the center, and I had a stereo ambience surrounding that, and it sounded real. And even though you're putting it down at like minus 40 dBFS, it makes the visual fit the audio.
So you start to realize how much audio you're picking up without being conscious to it. And as soon as it's gone, it doesn't make any sense. I make the analogy all the time. Once you're in a casino and the slot machines, you hear them. After a while, you don't really register them. It's that kind of thing that in a movie, you will get completely thrown on a scene because it doesn't feel like real life because something minute that you're not even paying attention to is missing. So an additional segue on that film that I did that post work on, while we were filming it, there was a disembodied voice coming through a speaker, and we wanted to get that. So we recorded all that dialogue, and then I actually brought in fans of the show going back. Now I have a favorite horrible little amp that I got from my Grandpa Joe, and I took that on set and just cranked it to full and ran all that VO through it on set and recorded it with several room mics, and was able to get the sound of that, and it fit completely perfectly into the room where the action was happening because we literally shot it into that room and recorded it naturally. So trying to match some of those things in post can be extremely difficult, but having that opportunity to be able to do it on the set, it made all the difference because it actually happened in that room instead of trying to make it feel like it happened in that room. So sometimes you can do some real world things like that that'll make a big difference. I know, again, harping on the whole reamp thing helps actually shoot that sound into the real environment.
Yeah, that first film conference call, I ended up needing a lot of stuff through phones and things like that. I think I ended up buying Futzbox after that. Can't remember if I used it on there. But some of the stuff, it just ended up being best to record it into my phone and then play it out of the speakerphone. So it's the microphone picking up the speakerphone from the iPhone, and that then playing it back through speakers. It's still, even though it's multiple generations of degradation and going through speakers and microphones and everything, it actually worked.
That's the degradation you want. And when we shot all that on the day, also Grandpa Joe amp in the room.
Yeah, some of that stuff worked from the production track, but I ended up doing a lot of stuff. Like some of the stuff was ADR or wild tracks.
Yeah,
for the people on the other side of the conversation. So I had to really distort that and make it sound terrible.
And that was another one of those crazy shoots where they shot an entire feature film in 4 days across 2 weekends, which is madness.
Yeah, I spent way longer than 2 weekends on cleaning that up.
Well, I did get that ADR of a guy peeing for you, so you're welcome.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was a really big help. It really was.
And that movie just got released, I think, last weekend under a new name.
Awesome. Yeah, a lot of the stuff is like, okay, it's like you're hitting the deadline. You hurry up. So I get it done as fast as I can. And then, all right, it's going to be out in 2 years from now.
Yeah, well, I mean, it did hit the festival circuit, so that's what you were running for.
Yeah. So let's talk about automation. I know that I'm not doing enough automation. You can't just set up a dialogue processing chain with lots of compression and call it a day.
Doesn't work
No.
because you need the dynamics.
Yeah, but also even with the perfect dialogue chain, there's still going to be words that get hidden by the music, or it maybe a syllable just isn't as clear as it could be. You want automation.
Yeah, another side point, don't start your mix before you have all your layers in, because you can do the best automation ever, and you can do some rough automation just to get your levels kind of where they should be. Don't get into your fine tuning until you enable your music, your sound effects, because you're going to find a lot of stuff went bye-bye.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff, it doesn't matter or it becomes more important. Yeah, try to not process everything in solo. I mean, good advice for music production as well. But
absolutely,
yeah, definitely with film mixing, you need a certain amount of consistency from the tracks, so you can get to the finish line a little bit quicker. But you're definitely going to need to automate a lot of stuff. I do things like I would automate the reverb returns rather than each dialogue track's reverb send. And it basically achieves the same end goal, but it's one fader to automate instead of 6 or 12 tracks or whatever it is. That was something that saved me a lot of time. So I might have a few more reverb tracks than the other way, but that's easier than automating sends.
I don't use a whole lot of reverb in post work unless I'm trying to create an environment. But normally there's too much of that for me. I very rarely use reverb in any post work.
Yeah, I do it just so like it's more felt than anything.
Yeah, some of the lavs are dead, like really dead. And if you got one guy that his lav sounds like garbage and they're booming him in a roomy room, then you have to make all those lavs match that boom sound.
Yeah, reverb is something that helps with matching as well as the EQ. You got to have that at least a little bit. So in the last film I did, there's some scenes in a bedroom, some scenes in a hallway, some scenes in a parking garage. So all of those needed really different reverbs, and all the scenes sounded better with reverb. And then there was one part where I actually have a video of this on the Reaper blog of there were wild lines, or maybe ADR, either way, off-screen character that is behind a door in a bathroom. I think they shot the wide angles with the girl in the bathroom and the close-ups without. So there's huge difference between the clean, close dialogue tracks and the distant ones, and I had to use EQ and reverb to make that work.
Yeah, it sounds fun. And one of my favorite, and I'm being wildly facetious, things that happens on set is when you have multiple camera shoots, they'll shoot the wide and the tight at the same time. So you have one lens, a long lens getting the tight, and then you have someone back wide. Both camera guys are standing next to each other. So you have that tight perspective, but also that wide perspective. You can only boom as tight as the wide. So that stuff's ridiculous.
Well, at least it is consistent, though.
Consistently bad, yes.
If they expect to use the lav, then yeah, it's probably fine. But
yeah, and I really prefer in narrative not to use the lav as much as possible. I use it as a backup, but then shooting TV, the entire thing is almost done on lav. So everything's moving fast. The TV show I'm on now, it's 4 cameras, so you don't even know where half the cameras are shooting at some points. So you just have to put the lavs on, make sure you get the best sound possible there, and the boom is the backup.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff you'll hear about in the big interviews with sound designers and dialogue editors of the big shows like Game of Thrones. There was recently a interview with that. Yeah, but they're talking about filming some of the outdoor scenes with I guess they were in Iceland or something like that.
Yeah, they shoot a lot in Iceland and Croatia. They're all over Europe.
Yeah, so it's all body packs, lavaliers, underneath armor or furs and things like that. So there's lots of movement sounds. Like it's just But they were saying like they're amazed that they got audio as good as they got, and then they're amazed how much further they could clean it up with things like RX.
Yeah.
And they were saying some of the mics, if there wasn't any wind on it, it was just dead quiet because there's just like there's no trees around. There's like
outside
nothing.
in a quiet, like if it's quiet outside, nothing sounds better because you just don't have all of those early reflections to deal with.
Yeah.
I had to mic a kid earlier this year, covered completely from head to toe in aluminum foil, and I still got good sound off his lav, and I'm not even sure how.
Yeah. So once we get our first pass of the mix done, and we've got close to complete coverage and everything is sounding good and feeling good, we're usually going to print a stereo mix, send it to the director. Sometime later, he will send you a list of changes to make. How can we make the revision process efficient or less frustrating?
Well, first you start by mixing on an analog console. That's not true at all. Having the recall that we have in modern DAWs makes this so much more pleasurable. You could just open it up exactly where you were without having to go back and patch everything in. So that helps a lot. And that's changed the industry a lot because now it is so easy to get in and make changes that I think changes are made when they don't need to be. So save your revisions because more times than not, you're going to make a bunch of changes and they'll say, you know what? It probably sounded better before. Can you do what we had before and then do this, this, and this? So make sure you always save your revisions.
Yeah. Every day you open the project, do a save as. And
I always number them and put a note of what I did. I do that for music
what I was
too.
Going to say. Yeah, exactly what I was going to say. I like to get a spreadsheet or some sort of document that has the time code and a description of what needs to be changed.
That makes all the difference. Because I've had when the guy just, okay, well, what about this part and then that part? And then you're handwriting notes as they're just saying things and then you have to go find it. You better really like the person if they're going to throw stuff at you like that. Or be paying you exceedingly well because the time suck on some of the stuff. I get anxiety sometimes when I do these projects because there's so much that has to be done. You're just staring at a mountain of work, and it's great when you have a good job and you want to you've got a couple weeks of work, but then if you stare at it, it's like staring at the sun. So break it down into smaller chunks, and hopefully when you get to the end, the amount of revisions are not brutal because that's the part where it can really get bogged down. And it's also the point where I let people know I will give you 1 or 2 rounds of revisions, whatever the original deal is. Anything beyond that, we're renegotiating our deal.
All right, so let's talk about delivering the actual film. Done all the revisions, everything is good, it's approved, it's paid for. How do we get this film, the audio for this film, out and delivered to our client? Want to take that?
Yeah, definitely use Pro Tools 8 and make sure you bounce in real time because I'm kidding.
Depends on if it's paid by the hour, right?
Yeah, I maybe that's why for so long Pro Tools was real time bounce. But even if I start a session in Pro Tools because I have to use it to do OMF, I will do all of my dialogue editing and then I'll export all of that into Reaper, continue to work on it from there. And then at the end, I'll just do a mix of the entire project once it's all done, export that as a stereo file, and then I'll take that stereo file and usually just zip it up and put it in Dropbox or Amazon S3 or whatever format or delivery system they've set up that they prefer, and drop it in there, and then wait for the notes to pour in.
Throughout the revision process, it's stereo, and often at the end, it's stems.
Depends on what they request. And if they want to make additional changes but still maintain your mix, if you give them stems, they can change dialogue or still cut scenes, move things around, and then still work from there. So you give them just dialogue, all the dialogue on one track, just music all on one track, score all on one track, ambience all on one track, and then they can make any additional changes if they want. Also, there's surround delivery, which is well beyond the scope of today's show.
Yeah.
But John and I did a video on that. It also includes getting up to speed on Reaper. So maybe put a link to the show notes in there of that. But Surround's a whole different monster. Stick with stereo for now, especially if you're brand new to this whole world. There's going to be plenty going on to throw that monkey wrench in the works. And that's also much more time consuming, much more expensive, much more disciplined. And if you're going to go that direction, make sure you really, really, really pad that estimate, because you have no idea until you get there.
Yeah, it's definitely something else. Mixing a film in stereo is difficult. It's 10 times worse with surround, just because nothing works right. It's the short way of saying it. Yeah, so there's a lot of difficulty with it. Just different programs have different channel orders. So like Reaper does SMPTE 5.1 instead of Film 5.1. So the channel order is left, right, center, rear, left, rear, right, low frequency high. And
I just printed those out as stems and then labeled them accordingly, and they can stack them in any order. But just calibration alone, just making sure that all your speakers are dialed in, that you're in the proper point of the listening position. It's so much more. And you think that listening to a stereo mix in one location going to another, the difference there is huge. It's, tenfold on surround. Just don't do it. Ever.
I think that's a good place to wrap up.
Yeah, I think we covered it on top of covering it. And I'm looking through the rest of your notes. It's all there. We covered dynamic range, bass. I don't think we missed anything.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, we'll see you in another 2 years.
At least. Thank you to everyone who comments and participates in the show. Thank you so much to everyone who's donated at least 2 years ago. Thanks to John for all the long hours of editing our show. There's plenty more where that came from. Well, probably not, but that's what the script says. We'll see you next week. Again, sorry.
Thank you for listening. The guys will be back next week. Please go to homerecordingshow.com and leave your comments.